My day always starts the same way. I wake up, make coffee, and head to work, an office job I've had for over 10 years. Day after day, the same routine, the same habits. There are no surprises, no excitement. I've grown used to my solitude. Watching others, I realized that my life had become just sand slipping through my fingers, leaving no trace, nothing meaningful behind. I never had big dreams or ambitions, and even on weekends, it was just old movies and cooking meals for one. But this time something changed. It was a typical late morning trip to the grocery store, where, as usual, I was picking up ingredients for dinner. And then I saw him. He was standing by the fruit stand, arms full of apples, and his eyes, there was something special in them. He didn't notice me right away, but I couldn't look away. He was younger than me, much younger, maybe 20 at most. There was something in his gaze, not the usual detached expression I'd grown used to seeing in people when they simply walk by. I don't know why, but in that moment, my heart beat a little faster. I walked over to him, and we started talking about the fruit, such a mundane topic, but it was the first time in ages that a routine shopping trip felt like something more. His smile, warm and open, held me there for a moment longer. It was just a few minutes of conversation, but those minutes lingered. In that instant, I realized that something had changed. Not immediately, but I felt that my life was suddenly much less predictable and far more full of possibility than it had been just a minute before. There was something in his gaze, in his brief words, that was special. We began to see each other more often. At first, it was purely by chance. His weekly grocery trips coincided with mine. I'd catch sight of him at the same fruit stand or in the aisles, and each time, there was that same spark. We exchanged small pleasantries, laughing at the absurdity of how easily a conversation could bloom over something as mundane as choosing the ripest bananas or debating which brand of cereal was best. It wasn't anything overt, not at first. Just shared smiles and light-hearted comments that grew into longer conversations. At times, we talk about our day, nothing too personal, just the kind of chatter that filled the gaps between strangers. But there was a quiet familiarity between us, an unspoken understanding that, perhaps, neither of us had with anyone else. I found myself looking forward to these brief encounters, and I noticed how the energy he brought into my otherwise dull routine made my days feel a little less gray. He was a college student, studying literature. His voice, young and full of passion, was always eager to share the latest book he was reading or a new insight he had discovered. And I, having lived through years of routine, found myself more and more captivated by the way he saw the world. So fresh, so wide-eyed. He made me feel like life had more to offer than I had realized. In his words, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years, a reminder of what it felt like to be curious, to chase something just for the joy of it, not because it was practical or expected. We spent hours talking in the aisles, standing amongst canned vegetables and cereal boxes, sharing little bits of our lives. His youthful enthusiasm made me smile, and I realized that I had begun to look forward to these accidental meetings. They felt like small rebellions against the monotony of my life. He wasn't trying to win me over, wasn't flirting in any way. But his company, his warmth, was enough to make me feel seen. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't invisible. It hit me one afternoon unexpectedly, in the middle of one of our usual conversations about books. We were standing by the dairy section, the fluorescent lights casting a soft glow over us. I was listening to him talk about a book I had never heard of, something philosophical and complex. His voice had a way of drawing me in, even when I didn't fully understand the topic. He looked at me with those bright, open eyes, eager for my thoughts on the book, and in that moment, something shifted inside me. I felt a warmth spreading across my chest, a flutter in my stomach that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just admiration for his intellect, though I certainly admired that. It was something deeper, something that pulled at the very fabric of my being. I was suddenly acutely aware of his presence. The way he stood, how his lips moved when he spoke, the lightness in his laughter. I excused myself quickly, retreating to another aisle, my heart pounding. I couldn't quite place what I was feeling. There was no denying it now. I had developed feelings for him, feelings that were more than simple affection. I felt a deep connection to him, and it terrified me. He was 20 years younger than me. The age gap had never seemed relevant until that moment. I was a woman in my 50s, set in my ways, and here he was, young, vibrant, full of dreams and possibilities. I couldn't ignore the stark difference between us anymore. What was I supposed to do with these feelings? I wasn't the kind of person who chased after impossible connections, and yet here I was, wishing things were different. As I wandered the aisles, my mind was racing. Could I possibly be falling for him? The idea of it felt ludicrous, even shameful. I tried to dismiss it. He was just a friend, I told myself. But as I looked at the jars of pickles and boxes of crackers, the thought refused to leave me. It wasn't something I could simply ignore. I returned to him a few minutes later, trying to hide the turmoil in my chest. He smiled at me, as if nothing had changed. And in that moment, I wished things were simple, that I could just smile back and continue our lighthearted talks. But inside, I was fighting a battle I wasn't sure I could win. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions I hadn't anticipated. Every time I saw him, my heart raced, my thoughts scattered. I couldn't focus on anything else. I tried to push these feelings aside, to bury them deep where I thought they could never resurface. But with each passing interaction, with every smile, every small gesture, he was unknowingly pulling me deeper into something I didn't know how to control. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind a mess of conflicting thoughts. What was I doing? What was he doing? This was foolish. But what if it wasn't? What if this connection I felt with him was real, undeniable, a rare gift in a life that had been so quiet and predictable? Could I really ignore it? There were moments when I was overwhelmed with guilt. He was young, with so much ahead of him. And I was not. My life had already been lived in so many ways. The thought of starting something so intense, something that would never be accepted by many, felt like a betrayal. To him. To myself. But it wasn't just guilt. It was fear. Fear of judgment. Of the society that would look at us and see nothing but a woman in her 50s, clinging to the past with someone who hadn't even fully lived yet. I saw their looks, their whispers. People didn't understand. And yet he didn't care about any of that. He treated me like I mattered, like I was worthy of his time and attention. I had never felt that before, not in this way. Not in a way that made me feel like I was still alive, still seen, still capable of feeling something deeply. I kept telling myself it wasn't right, that I should stop these feelings before they grew any more. But every time we spoke, every time I saw the joy in his eyes when he looked at me, it was impossible to suppress. The more I pushed it away, the more it came back. The truth was I wanted him, not just as a friend. It wasn't just a fleeting attraction either. It was something profound, something that made my heart ache with longing and uncertainty. And it was terrifying. I had built my life around certainty, around routines that kept me safe from the complexities of emotions. But now everything felt different. Every time we were together, it was like I was waking up to a world I had long since forgotten. And that's when I realized it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me too. It was about finding something real, something that made me feel alive, even at my age. I had spent so long living in the shadows, not allowing myself to feel anything too deeply. But now, I was being given a chance to feel, to truly feel. And I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to take it, but I knew I didn't want to let it go either. So I continued to see him. I let the feelings grow, even though I was terrified. Each moment spent together only added to the fire inside me. I wasn't sure where it would lead, or if I was even ready for it, but I couldn't stop. The journey had already begun, and I could only hope that whatever happened, I would have the strength to face it. I woke up one morning with a strange, unsettling certainty in my chest. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only one clear, overwhelming thought. I had to see him again. And not just in the supermarket aisles or at the coffee shop we'd started visiting together. No, this time it had to be different. I had to invite him over, to see where this thing between us could go, or at least to understand it more clearly. But the idea of opening my home to him, of inviting him into my personal, carefully organized world, was terrifying. What would he think? What would I think? Every conversation had already begun to blur the lines between just friendly banter and something deeper, more intimate. But this was crossing a line. What would happen once he stepped inside? Once the boundaries I'd maintained so carefully my entire life began to dissolve. I spent the entire day pacing, second-guessing myself. What if I was misreading the situation? What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he was just being kind, indulging in some kind of harmless friendship? And here I was, falling for him, letting these feelings grow without any clear understanding of where they might lead. But there was a fire in me, a deep, undeniable pull that urged me forward, even though every part of me wanted to pull back. I had never felt so much vulnerability, so much fear, yet also so much possibility. It felt almost foolish, this decision, but it also felt necessary. The thought of leaving this unexplored, of letting it fade quietly into nothing, felt worse than the fear of embracing it fully. So I did it. I found the courage that I wasn't sure I had, and I called him. I could feel my hands shaking as I dialed his number. When he picked up, his voice, warm, familiar, made me smile before I even said anything. I was wondering, I began, hesitant, if you might want to come over sometime. I could make dinner, maybe? I don't know, just if you're free. There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the soft rustle of him shifting. Then his voice, low and easy, came back. I'd like that, he said. I've been meaning to spend more time with you. I felt the words wash over me, comforting yet electrifying. He didn't hesitate, didn't make it awkward. He said it like it was natural, like it made sense. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. I spent the rest of the day preparing, setting the table, cooking a meal that I'd spent far too much time perfecting. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew that something would change once he walked through that door. I was terrified of what it might mean, but at the same time, there was an undeniable excitement growing inside me. When the knock came, my heart leaped in my chest. I opened the door, and there he was. He was standing there, looking as handsome as ever, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The moment he crossed the threshold, everything seemed to shift in the room. The walls I had so carefully built around myself, my cautiousness, my doubts, started to crumble, bit by bit. And I wondered for the first time if I was finally ready to take a step into the unknown. He stepped inside, the warmth of the evening outside contrasting with the cool air of my living room. I felt my heart skip a beat as he took in the space. The shelves were full of books, the small dining table neatly set, and soft music played in the background, a soundtrack to the quiet solitude I had known for years. Everything was exactly as I had always kept it. Everything, except for him. He looked around, and his gaze lingered on a few of the things I'd spent so much time curating over the years. Family photographs, art pieces I had collected, and the plants I'd tended to like old friends. He seemed genuinely interested, but it wasn't just about the things. It was his presence that filled the room, creating a shift in the atmosphere that I couldn't quite explain. I've never seen a place so lived in, he said softly, his voice carrying a gentle warmth. It feels like a real home. Cozy. I couldn't help but smile. It's my little corner of the world, I replied, feeling the soft vulnerability of the moment, as if in saying this, I was sharing something deeper than just my space. I was sharing a part of myself I hadn't allowed anyone to see for years. Dinner was quiet, but not in the awkward way I had feared. There was a rhythm to our conversation now, an unspoken comfort that had developed over time. He asked about my life, my past, and I found myself telling him stories I hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. In return, he spoke of his aspirations, his dreams, his youthful idealism that seemed so different from my own more grounded perspective. But there was a kind of beauty in that difference, in the way our worlds collided and complemented each other. At some point, he reached across the table to pass me the bread basket. His hand brushed mine, a momentary touch, but the electric charge was undeniable. It wasn't a fleeting sensation. It lingered, filling the space between us with a new kind of awareness. I saw it in his eyes, this recognition, this understanding that something had shifted. We were no longer just two people sharing a meal. We were something else, something more. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was a kind of stillness, an acknowledgement of the intimacy that was unfolding between us. I could see it in his gaze, how he looked at me, no longer just the woman who lived down the street, but someone he had come to know, to appreciate, and perhaps, just perhaps, someone he was beginning to feel something for. It was then that I realized I was falling for him in a way that transcended all the doubts, all the questions I had carried for weeks. His warmth, his presence, It had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in years. And though there was still a whisper of uncertainty in the back of my mind about the age difference, about what this could mean, I couldn't deny the depth of the connection that was forming between us. It felt as if, for once, I had found something real, something worth risking everything for. As the evening wore on, we moved to the couch, the conversation flowing more easily now. His hand brushed mine again, this time lingering, the weight of his touch saying more than words ever could. And when he looked at me then, there was a depth in his eyes, a kind of longing that mirrored my own. In that moment, I realized just how much I had been waiting for something, someone, to stir my soul again. This wasn't just a dinner. This wasn't just a friendly visit. This was something more, something neither of us had expected but were both starting to acknowledge. We were standing on the edge of something profound, and for once, I wasn't afraid to step into it. As he left that evening, I stood at the door for a long moment, watching him walk down the path. The soft click of the door closing behind me seemed louder than it should have been, a punctuation mark on a night that had left me with more questions than answers. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart still racing, my mind swirling with thoughts. What had happened between us? How had it come to this? When I had spent so many years convinced that love was a young woman's game, something for the carefree and unburdened. Not someone like me, someone with years of memories, responsibilities, and a lifetime of doubts. But now, with the door closed and the silence stretching around me, I couldn't deny it any longer. What I had with him was not a fleeting fancy, not some momentary distraction. It was real, it was deep, and it made me feel something I had almost forgotten existed alive. I could still feel the warmth of his touch on my hand, the way his eyes held mine as though he saw me, not just the woman I had become over time, but the woman I had once been, full of dreams, full of life. And somewhere in his gaze, I had seen a future that included me, a future where age was irrelevant. It was difficult, this realization. The weight of it was something I had never truly understood until now. There were so many things to consider. The whispers of society, the judgments, the expectations that said love between two people like us was impossible, absurd even. What did it say about me, about him? Was I clinging to something youthful, refusing to accept that my years had passed and that my time for love had expired? But as I sat on the couch that night, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the room, I couldn't help but reflect on the years I had spent alone, the years I had spent waiting for something, someone, to come and show me that there was more to life than just getting through it. And here he was, this bright, young man who had come into my life, who had opened something in me I had thought was forever closed. His presence challenged everything I had believed about age and love. It made me question the boundaries I had set for myself. Who decided that love was only for the young? Who wrote the rules that said I couldn't experience something beautiful at this stage of my life? In the quiet of my home, I began to understand that love didn't have an expiration date. That passion, connection, and intimacy weren't the sole property of the young. They could be found at any age, by anyone willing to reach for them. And I was reaching. For the first time in years, I was reaching, not out of desperation but out of hope. Hope that perhaps there was still more for me to experience, to feel, to give. And what if the love I had found with him was exactly what I needed? Something that reminded me of the beauty of life, of joy, of rediscovering the parts of myself I had forgotten. What if this relationship, this unexpected turn, was my reward for all the years I had spent living cautiously, responsibly, waiting for the right time to take risks? I had spent so much of my life worrying about what others would think, worrying about how I would be judged, about the way society would see me. But now, sitting in the quiet of my own thoughts, I realized how much of that was simply noise. The truth was, no one else could define my happiness, my worth, or my right to love. Only I could do that. I was a woman who had lived through decades of experience, and in that experience, I had learned that love is not bound by time. It transcends age, transcends expectations, transcends everything. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it fully without hesitation, without the fear of what others might think. I wasn't just a woman in her 50s anymore. I was a woman who had discovered a new chapter. A chapter filled with possibility, with passion, with a love that was all my own. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize how much I've changed in such a short time. The woman I was before, closed off, resigned to the routine of life, feels like someone I hardly recognize. In her place stands someone new, someone braver, more open, more willing to embrace the complexities of life, including love. The relationship with him has not been without its challenges. There are moments of doubt, of hesitation, of wondering if what we have is too unconventional, too difficult to sustain. Society doesn't make it easy, and the age gap remains something that looms large in my mind at times. There are looks from people when we go out, whispers I try not to hear. But none of that matters anymore. What matters is the connection we share, the way we make each other feel. What matters is the warmth in his smile, the way his hand fits into mine like it was always meant to be there. What matters is that I feel seen, not just as a woman of a certain age, but as a woman full of desire, full of life, capable of love. Love, in all its forms, should be celebrated at any stage of life. I am no longer afraid to love in the way I want, in the way that feels right for me. Age, society's expectations, those are just constructs, constraints that exist only if we allow them to. The heart doesn't understand time. The heart simply knows connection. And when two hearts beat together, when they find each other, nothing else really matters. I've learned that it's never too late for anything. Not for love, not for passion, not for the simple joy of finding someone who makes the world feel a little brighter. I've learned that love can be unexpected, but it can also be everything you've been waiting for, even when you don't realize it. And so here I am, a woman in her 50s, once quiet, once lonely, now filled with a hope I thought had long since faded. I've discovered that it's not about how old we are, or how many years we have left, but how we choose to live those years. How we choose to love, to take risks, to be vulnerable, to be open to the unexpected. If you ever find yourself wondering whether it's too late for love, for something beautiful, for something real, remember this. There's no such thing as the wrong time for love. Love can bloom at any age if you allow it. If you open your heart and trust that the best may yet be ahead of you. I know now that I don't have to be defined by my age, by the years that have passed, or by anyone's expectations. I only need to be defined by the love I feel, the love I am willing to give, and the love I am fortunate enough to have found. And for the first time in my life, that's enough.